welcome back to another episode of From the Horse's Mouth, where I'm sitting with Jeremy Walker, owner and winemaker of Grangehurst Winery.
Great to be here.
Yeah, awesome.
And
Thanks
it's nice to be part of your campaign and your program. Thanks very much for including Grangers.
It's a pleasure. Well, thank you for inviting me into your house. As you can see, we're sitting in Jeremy Walker's kitchen to do today's tasting. Mandy Walker's kitchen, my apologies. Okay, so Jeremy, to start things off, first of all, can you just tell me a little bit about yourself? What got you into winemaking and where you've produced wine thus far?
Okay. Right, well, I grew up in Camps Bay, so close to the beach, and that was a very important part of my life in the early years, and still is in fact. And we moved out here when I was 19. My folks bought this property, just a place in the country. And I, at that stage, had just completed my national service. So I'd been in the Navy, South African Navy for 72 and 73, and had kind of wasn't sure what I wanted to do as a career. But my dad had planted a seed some years previously about the wine industry. And he was chatting to somebody that he knew in the wine industry, and they painted this really glamorous picture of the life of a winemaker. And it kind of appealed to me in a way, but never really became important until my last couple of months in the Navy. And I thought, gee, I've got to decide what to do when I finish in the Navy. So I thought, well, maybe go and study viticulture or wijnkunde at Stellenbosch. And I then organised, once again my dad had a role to play. He knew somebody who was then the CEO of Gilbey's in South Africa, Alan Bell. And Alan Bell lived at Grangehurst in the main homestead there, because that property used to be owned by IDV or Gilbey's. Okay. And so I went around there and had an interview with Alan Bell to find out a bit about the wine industry. And as it happened, his son Anthony was doing first year wijnkunde. So I got to chat to Anthony, and I had the most amazing day with these guys. They showed me around the cellar at Grangehurst, their private wine collection. We had some fantastic wines from around the world.
I was just about to say, you must have had quite a bit of wine just to kind of convince you into that.
We had quite a bit, yeah. And then I came back home and I said to my old man, I said, right, okay, I know what I want to do. I want to enroll and do this course at Stellenbosch. Nice. So that's what it all started.
I'm sure everybody out there is very thankful that you did make the decision to make wine, because what you're producing is absolutely world class. I mean, the wine we're tasting today is the Nikela 2002. And is there something specific that you'd like us to know about this wine? Besides for the fact that it's got a lot of power and it's drinking incredibly well.
Well, our kind of, people often say to me, why do the wines last so long or age so well? And I'm not really quite sure what they handle. We basically do very traditional winemaking. There's nothing fancy about it. It's all, we select good quality grapes. And that's a part of our story, was not having our own vineyards. So the whole business, when I started it in 1992, and I was still living in Camps Bay at the time, actually, my folks were living here. And I asked my dad if I could take over his squash court as our start-off wine cellar. And he stopped playing squash by then, and the building was just standing there. He said, fine, take it and use it. And so we started buying in grapes in 1992, assembled a little bit of equipment, and in fact I used the basket press that I used in our first year here was the basket press that I bought when I was at a break from the wine industry for about 5 or 6 years. And part of that I was at BP in the oil industry. Oh, wow. But I had this goal that I wanted to get my own wine business going. So I bought a wine press in 1983 or 84, somewhere around there. Little hand basket press, wooden basket press. And before I'd even used it, one of my colleagues from Stellenbosch University, we studied together. She was one of the 2 first women graduates at Stellenbosch University, Janie Muller. And she set up the winery called Lemberg. And she and her husband Jan, who also came from Camps Bay, and she needed equipment, and I bought this little wine press, and she said, can I use your equipment? And I hadn't even used it yet, and she commissioned it, so she used it at Lemberg for a number of years. But the wooden basket press was not really that suitable for white wine. And anyway, then when I helped Seymour Pritchard to get Clos Malvern going. Yeah, for sure. That was...
Sorry to interrupt, but now speaking about Clos Malvern, Guy spoke about Clos Malvern as well. So I mean, I'm sure there's some kind of connection.
Yeah, it's quite... Guy and I have sort of followed in similar footsteps really, because we both worked at Bertram's. I was quite a few years ahead of him. I was there in 78 and 79. Can't quite remember from his interview when he started working there. But so Guy worked at Bertram's after I'd left. And then I was out of wine for about 5 or 6 years, and met Seymour Pritchard. I met him on a skiing holiday actually in Austria, and he had this little vineyard in Stellenbosch. We became friends, and I said to him, Seymour, you've got vineyards. I'm really itching to get back into the wine industry. How about we set up a little wine business here? And he's a very entrepreneurial sort of guy, so he said, sure, let's go for it. And so then that basket press came across to Malvern. It was used for a number of years. In fact, Guy would have used it here as well, because I left there in 91, he took over in 91, and the basket press was there. The first year or two that we used the basket press here at Grangehurst, it was shuffling between Malvern and Grangehurst. So I needed it on Wednesday and Seymour, Guy needed it on Friday, and it was going backwards and forwards. And that actually, we did that for a couple of years.
But that's beautiful. I mean, that just shows you that within the wine industry, there was still a very much an independent approach to methods of production.
And also great camaraderie and assistance from one winemaker to another.
For sure. Does that still exist? I mean,
yeah, it does, very much so.
Okay, because that's important, because, you know, if we want this culture and this industry to succeed and to carry on growing, this kind of mentality has to exist. Without it, we'd never be able to...
working together is ideal, what we really want. And then, I mean, that first year in 1992, I thought, well, you're only fermenting small batches of grapes, 3 tons maximum at a time in a tank, in an open tank. And I didn't think I'd need any cooling. So the first batch of grapes that came in, temperature started rising, and I was a bit nervous. I thought maybe I do need cooling. I didn't have any cooling. And I happened to be in Stellenbosch, and I bumped into Kevin Arnold.
Oh,
and
nice.
He said, how's your first vintage going? I said, I'm a little worried about the fermentation temperatures. I said, and I haven't got any cooling coils or anything. He said, go and speak to Hempy's. Hempy's de Toy. He's got some. He's got something he doesn't use anymore. So I went to see Hempy's. Hempy's gave me 2 of his old cooling coils. I came along, put them here, connected to our borehole water, and it worked.
Yeah, that's great.
So that's the kind of thing that happens in the wine industry.
Yeah, for sure, that's great. And also, the one thing that everybody would have picked out from everything you said over here is that why play squash when you can make wine?
Well, I had no chance of a professional squash career, that was for sure. I was a sort of also played squash player. Now, I used to enjoy my squash, I said to my old man, but the other thing is I could never have lost any money out of playing squash.
So Jeremy, when it comes to production of wines here at Grangehurst, do you have anybody helping you with production?
Yes, I have not from the early years, we had a guy that was working for us for about 5 or 6 years, maybe a bit longer, and he was really initially just employed in the garden, but he came and helped me in the winery, and he was a great help for a number of years, but then he decided to leave. And then, very fortunately, the lady that was our domestic help in the house for many, many years for my folks, and for our kids when our kids were growing up, she's got 4 children, and one of whom is Gladys. And Gladys was actually born on Grangehurst on the property, and lived here her whole life. And when she finished her matric, when she was about to finish her matric, and I said to Janie, I said, you know, what is Gladys going to do when she finishes school? And she said, well, she'd like to be a winemaker.
Nice.
I said, what? So I said, if she wants to do that, let her come and work for us. Janie was very unimpressed. Her daughter wanted to become a winemaker. She thought my folks and I were alcoholics because we had gin and tonic. Well, they had a gin and tonic every day and a glass of wine at dinner. So Janie was not that keen on the whole wine story. But Gladys is a free-spirited lady, and she got involved with us in the winery. Initially, it was just for a trial period to see how she enjoyed the industry. And almost 20 years later, she's still with us.
Nice.
Thankfully.
Yeah, thankfully.
And she's been on we sent her on some training courses at Elsenburg. And she's been over to Burgundy and done the exchange program there with a whole lot of other youngsters working in the vineyards and working in the wineries, and that's great. And she's a wonderful help for me.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
So Jeremy, you're part of the Cape Winemakers Guild. Can you just tell me what is the Cape Winemakers Guild and how does a winemaker get inducted into the guild?
Okay. Well, I'm about to leave the Cape Winemakers Guild, but I can still tell you about the history of it, my history with it. So yeah, I was invited to join the guild. It is by invitation only, and in the year that I was invited to join, which was in '96, together with, there's only one other guy from that year that's still a member of the guild, and that's Carl Schultz from Hartenberg. And we became very good friends through the guild. And so we were both invited in 1996 to join the guild. At that stage, there were only 16 members. And the year that we were invited to join, they invited 6 of us. So it became 22, from 16 to 22. And that was the start of the guild really starting to grow. It's a great organization. It does a lot of good in terms of mentoring and the protege program that we have. Also donating various funds to other projects, charitable projects. And then we have our technical tastings, which are wonderful. In fact, Carl Schultz hosted us last week at Hartenberg with a tasting of really great right bank properties, Cheval Blanc and Cannon and a whole lot of beautiful places. So that's part of the real benefit for guild members to be involved in all those lovely tastings. And then we have the auction, the Cape Winemakers Guild auction. So I decided this year, I've been thinking about it for a while, I've been a member for 26 years. I'm one of the older members in the guild, I would say. And I just thought it's time to make way because it's a limited number of people that can be part of the guild. I always say at the moment there are 45 members of the guild. There must be at least another 45 members out there, or not members, 45 winemakers out there making wines as good as any of the guild members. But it just can't get bigger and bigger and bigger and grow into something monstrous.
So if you're planning on retiring from the guild, should it not be your right then to induct a new member? No. That'd be pretty cool, then.
Yeah, it would be, but it would be a little bit subjective.
Yeah, for sure.
And no, so you need to get into the guild. You need to be invited or sort of what's the word? Proposed. Proposed by a member who has to have somebody else to second. And then our AGM, which we're coming up next month. There's a vote, and it's actually very difficult. I mean, I say it jokingly, but I actually genuinely mean it. It was a lot easier to become a member of the guild, and I was invited to join it these days, because there's just so much competition these days. There's so many good winemakers out there. In the last 26 years, there have been a large number of graduates through Elsenburg and through Stellenbosch University, and we've had great travels around the world, experience in different wineries, making good wine. So these days, I mean, it's very competitive to get in there, and it's just a bit of a luck. And I think, as I said, there are a lot of people that could very well qualify to be there, but we can't have the guild growing to be 60, 80, 100 people to become unmanageable.
For sure. So talking about the Cape Winemakers Guild, one of my favorite wines that I've tasted to date happened to actually be a wine that you produced, and it was 100% Pinotage. It must have been from Stellenbosch. I managed to get a few bottles from Miles. I want to let you know how much he sold them onto me for. But still to this day, I haven't yet tasted anything that could match.
Was that the Hidden Valley Pinotage?
Yes, that's exactly correct. That wine, like, I regret drinking it all. Because if I still had a bottle, it was probably going to be worth quite a bit. But that to me is by far one of the best Pinotages I've ever had.
Really?
So thank you for producing such a lovely wine.
That's also thanks to Dave Hidden. That's another relationship that Guy and I have as well, because Guy and I both made wine for Dave Hidden.
Oh, cool.
And Dave and I studied, we did the MBA together, and then we worked at BP together, but he'd also studied wine. It's quite weird. And then we kept up a connection after I'd left BP. And he said, if ever I find any land for him, he's quite interested in getting back into the wine industry. And then, long story short, that's how I introduced him to the property in Devon Valley and in the property up on the hill.
Yes, sir.
And that's where the name Hidden Valley came from. Originally, Dave Hidden buying a property in Devon Valley. And that became Hidden Valley.
Nice, that's awesome.
And then Guy got involved with Dave as well, and we had that joint venture. I heard you talking on the program, on Guy's program, about the joint venture.
Yeah, with the Pinotage, for sure. That I wish, obviously I tried to twist his arm after having the bottle of Sem with him. But unfortunately, the wine didn't do enough work for me, and I didn't get to taste the wine.
Well, maybe I'll do that. I've got a few bottles up there. I guess. But there was something very interesting about that tasting we had, because now Dave asked me to assemble a group of winemakers, Pinotage, not only Pinotage, but sort of reasonably good wine tasters and winemakers together. And then we had a tasting of a 100% Guy, 100% Jeremy, 50-50, 80 Jeremy, everything. We had this sort of range of different wines. And everybody was completely diplomatic and tactful. The 50-50 was the best of all.
Hey, and it ended up picking up big, so that's...
And that's what we did. We blended it 50-50, and then the rest is history on that wine, because that got Hidden Valley onto the map.
Yes, see, that's awesome.
And it was great. It was a very nice wine.
So Jeremy, I wanted to ask you, this property used to be called Boerplaas, right? So how did the name Grangers come about?
I'm just going to lubricate my tongue here a bit.
Yeah, too much talking, more time for drinking.
Okay, my parents came out here from England. My dad originally came here in 1944 during the Second World War. He was on an aircraft carrier which got repaired in Durban, and all the crew got sent to Simonstown. He spent 3 months here after the war back in the UK with my folks. When he got married, the conditions were not very good, so he said to my mum, how about going out to South Africa? So they came out here in 1952, and then my mum had lived in a property in Birmingham called The Grange, and my dad had lived in a little street in Chingford in London called Hurst Close. So when they bought this property, they combined the names of the child's names, Grangehurst. And then what is so interesting about it is that Grange means a country house with farm buildings.
Oh, wow.
And Hurst means on a hill.
Yes,
so it's an incredible combination, just so appropriate.
So it was meant to be, for sure.
It was meant to be, yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, in the Helderberg, there is what they call the Golden Triangle. Does Grangehurst form part of the Golden Triangle, and can you explain what the Golden Triangle phenomenon is?
I think that was, once again, we keep talking about Guy, but I think he coined that phrase.
Oh, really?
We didn't have it on one of the Stellenbosch wines. They had the Golden Triangle series of wine. Sure. But somebody must have spoken about this area. And I think both from a viticultural point of view, it is a very good area, as there are many good areas, but this is a really good area, close to the ocean. We, during the summer, when it's the prevailing wind is a southeasterly wind, but it kind of wraps across, because of the mountain behind us, we don't get the southeaster.
Okay.
And it wraps across as a southwesterly wind. When we were down in the pavilion a little bit earlier, our tasting room, you can see the ocean. The wind, when it's blowing southeaster from Gordons Bay through to Cape Town, it kind of wraps around and it comes from False Bay, blows across in a southwesterly direction of our vineyards in this whole big area. So it keeps it relatively cool.
Yeah, retains natural acidity.
Yeah, they're good soils here as well. And I mean, our property is certainly within the Golden Triangle. Some of our grapes come from within the Golden Triangle because we buy from some of our neighbours around here. But we've got a vineyard that we bought in partnership with another guy 20 years ago. And that's just on the slopes of the lower slopes of close to the Simonsberg.
Okay.
It's right next to, it's behind Louis Stradham's property and David Finnis's property, opposite Morgenhof, but that kind of area.
Yeah.
And that sort of faces west and southwest, so it also gets quite nice cool breezes there. But that isn't part of the Golden Triangle.
Yeah, also Golden Triangle, Bermuda Triangle, there's a big similarity because in this region, plenty of excellent wine goes missing all the time, right? The good wine vanishes in this region for sure. So when it comes to winemaking, Jeremy, do you have a favorite cultivar to work with, and do you also have a least favorite cultivar to work with in the cellar?
I would say if I had to only ever work with one grape variety, it would be Cabernet Sauvignon.
Okay.
I mean, I've got a strong passion for Pinotage, but Pinotage is not quite like Pinot Noir, the heartbreak grape, but it is tricky. Pinotage can be very tricky and you can be disappointed with it. And Cabernet is great in the vineyard. It's fairly resistant to a lot of the illness, disease and what have you. Fermentation is always very nice, and it's a wine that we've never really picked up any problems with Cabernet at all. And it's a wine that's of course internationally marketable. Okay. So I think that if I had to only work with one grape variety, it would be Cabernet. But I'm very passionate about Pinotage, and we've had some very nice Pinotage wines over the years. We've also, to be quite honest, had a couple of issues in those early years with that bitterness that happened in the late 60s, late 90s, 96, thereabouts. So those were quite some challenges that we had to face. And but I think we and all other Pinotage producers have overcome that. We know what the problem was. We've got through it, but it was a problem.
So that's something. Now that we're on this topic, there's still a lot of consumers out there, or wine drinkers, that turn a blind eye towards Pinotage because of what's happened in the past. To give Pinotage a second chance, what would you tell these people out there?
Trust your taste.
Trust your taste. And give Pinotage another opportunity to wow the palate.
There are a couple of great examples of that. Dave Hughes is one of our very sort of well thought of wine people in the industry, and he told me a story once about going out for dinner with a journalist who was like I won't mention the guy's name, an international journalist, and he was totally anti-wine, anti-Pinotage. And Dave took him out for dinner because he wanted to just teach this guy that there are some good Pinotages around. And he was a bit naughty, he took a bottle of Cab and decanted Pinotage into that bottle, and they had it over dinner. And he said to this guy, well, what do you think of the wine? And the guy really liked it. He said, well, I'd just like to let you know you've enjoyed your first bottle of Pinotage. And the guy was really pissed off with him about it. And that same person was being entertained here by Bruce Jack years later.
Nice,
And Bruce asked me for one of our, in fact it was our guild wine. It was a Guild 95 Pinotage. And he asked if he could present that in this tasting to this particular international wine judge and wine writer. And this guy tasted it blind, and he thought it was from the Rhone, and he was very positive and complimentary about the wine. And Bruce said to him, well, it's a 13-year-old Pinotage. And I've actually been, my mate Carl Schultz caught me up tasting my own wine, the same one, 95 Pinotage, at a tasting at dinner at his place, and he served it. And I thought it was a Rhone. Maybe because I know Carl loves Rhone, and I thought, well, it's got Rhone characteristics, but Pinotage, when it gets old, it does develop Rhone characteristics. So
that's the beautiful thing when it comes to tasting blind. The power of suggestion plays a big role when it comes to trying to pick out certain tones and flavors within a wine.
But I think you get that phrase that I coined there. Well, I didn't coin it. This Bruce Jackson. He gave me a little peak cap one day, which had on the front of it Flagstone, when he started off Flagstone. And their little mantra was trust your taste.
Nice.
I think it's brilliant.
For sure, absolutely.
And that's what it should be for everybody. Nobody can tell you the wine's good or bad.
It's subjective. It's everybody's taste.
But people shouldn't say. Some people say to us, "I just don't like Merlot." And I say, how can you say that? Because there are some Merlots that will appeal to you.
Exactly.
You can't just say across the board, I don't like Merlot.
For sure. Says the beer drinker. That's So that's exactly that's it. So the craziest thing that you've ever had to endure within the cellar or during a harvest?
I don't know about the craziest, but probably one of the things that was really like a standout memory that I have was, I can't remember which vintage it was, but I was busy carrying the mash pipe and I was standing on top of our tanks. And all of our fermentation tanks are open tanks with scaffold boards over the top, and we do manual punch down 6-8 times a day. And fortunately the wine wasn't fermented, it's still just the juice, grape juice, and I was carrying this pipe. And it was in the evening, it was like 10 o'clock or so at night. And the guys that were supporting the pipe below, just for some reason, let it go. And it pulled me over into the tank. But as I went into the tank, I fell onto the edge of the tank and cracked my ribs. Anyway, the guys, like, it wasn't fermenting, so there was no CO2 in the tank,
thank goodness.
Luckily. And then it took them about 10 minutes to get me out of the tank, and then I ended up in hospital for the weekend. And I was really upset with that, because it was one of the best weekends I'd ever had with surf at the Strand. I was lying in hospital with broken ribs.
No, man.
So we thought about coming out with a cracked rib cabernet or something, but we didn't do it.
So, in terms of your winemaking career, what's been your biggest achievement to date?
I don't know, I suppose probably what really gives me the greatest pleasure is getting feedback from customers. And we regularly get, from people that we never used to know, but we've got to know now through them being customers, sending WhatsApp, sending emails, just saying how much they've enjoyed a bottle of our wine and everything, and that's quite nice to hear.
Sure.
In fact, that joint venture wine that Guy and I did, 97 Hidden Valley Pinotage, there was a very interesting American guy that became a customer of ours in the early years, loved South African wine, loved African wildlife, and he used to bring rich Americans to Africa. And they'd go and do a tour to Kenya or Tanzania, and then come down to the Cape for wine. And he sent me an email, not an email, he sent me a fax, still in the days of faxes. He sent a fax from Knoxville, Tennessee, and he said, Jeremy, I just want to let you know, I'm sitting here with a group of Americans drinking that Hidden Valley 97 Pinotage, and I told them that right now they are the only people anywhere in the world drinking this wine, which is quite cool. It's just like that. So it's very nice to have things, basically feedback from customers is the most important.
Of course.
And in the early years we did quite a lot of entering shows and things like that, and over the years I must admit I've been a bit slack and we haven't carried on doing it very much. But we had some nice awards in the early years, especially in the first year, which got us off to a good start. So I mean, awards, I also heard Guy talking about awards. I mean, it's great for people when you get them. And I mean, I think of certain wineries where one year they get like 5 platter stars, and they get 4 wines with 5 platter stars and Veritas and whatever, and the next year they don't get any.
Yeah, exactly. You have to start asking questions.
We've only ever had 1 platter 5-star wine. It was 95 Cab Merlot, and I often joke about it because the Merlot in that wine was actually crushed and fermented and everything by Mandy. I was very sick that day. I just couldn't get out of bed, and I said to him, the grapes have got to come in today, you've got to handle it. I tried to get instructions from Whitney. We think that was her impact on the wine, was to get a 5-star platter. But what was interesting was that when the book came out, most of that wine was already been sold out. So we had the 96, and the 96 got a 3.5-star rating. So people would come into the tasting room and they'd say, I want to buy the 95. So sorry, it's all sold out. We're now selling 96, and quite a few people would say, well, would you like to try it? Like, the book, 3.5, no, we don't want to try it. I said, just try it. But some people are like,
that's the thing. That's the thing.
They're lost.
What is your ethos when it comes to your production of wine?
I suppose it's just, it's really, I mean, so many people use the terminology, but it really is just to do it as naturally as possible. Well, maybe not as naturally as possible, because we do add yeast as a rule. We do add, yeast cultures, but all the winemaking is very handcrafted, very traditional. That's our mantra: handcrafted, traditional, and unhurried wines.
Yeah, for sure.
Unhurried by the vintages releasing when they're 10 years old.
I was just about to say, so anybody out there who does come across a Grangehurst wine, you'll always notice that the vintages are slightly older than what you'll find from other producers. And I mean, I love that, because you're releasing your wine when it's drinking at its best. And I think it's, to some extent, you're spoiling the palates out there by doing so.
Well, we've often, and this is another thing, is the feedback you get from people going to wine shows, and I'm sure other winemakers do get it, but we've often at wine shows had people coming back and say, it's the best wine of the tasting. These are the best wines of the tasting. And then I say to them, it's a bit of the other wineries got a bit of a disadvantage, because you're now tasting wine that's 10 years old, whereas the other wines are 2 or 3 years old. Those wines most of them will become great wines, but they're just too young.
Too aggressive.
And that's why at this stage, our wines are tasting the best for you because they're at the right stage to drink. Other ones are just too early, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great shame in the industry, not only in South Africa, it's worldwide.
Yeah.
I think a lot of wines, good quality red wines, are consumed when they're too young.
Yeah, for sure.
And they're nowhere near their potential.
Absolutely. So, Jeremy, you're currently renovating your new tasting room. I've had a look at it. I took a walk onto the property earlier. I took a quick squiz, and it's looking absolutely fantastic. Can you maybe just let us know when it will be open to the public?
I always get embarrassed when people ask me that question. But funny enough, I actually just sent out a message today, an email to somebody about trying to get staff, because it's not just getting the building finished. We now need to get staff to be able to present the tastings. And we're going to try and get that organised. I'm going to probably start doing tastings in December. I don't think I'll have anybody in place to do the tasting, so we'll have to. And it's difficult for us to try and do everything.
Yeah, I know, of course.
Mandy, my wife, Mandy's very involved in the business, but she's involved with lots of other stuff and all finance and bookkeeping and whatever else. And it's difficult for us to just dedicate our time to be standing in the tasting room.
Yeah, for sure.
So unfortunately, we have to have somebody else to do it.
Yeah.
But the building is almost finished. It's been a long-term project. It's like our wines. It was very unhurried. And it's finally there. Well, we've just got to get the handrails got to get put up and a few little finishing touches. And then we've got to equip it. Yeah. But it should be... I'm going to start doing tastings during December, even if they're kind of on a ad hoc basis. Okay. And then hopefully get into it full stream with in the new year. Yeah.
So if anybody's looking to become a tasting ambassador, absolutely. You guys need to reach out to Jeremy over here at Grangers. Yeah. When it comes to giving advice to folks out there who are just starting out with their wine appreciation, what kind of advice would you give them?
I think to be adventurous. Don't be too led by what the gurus or the experts say. You can obviously read about wines and get some sort of indication from so-called expert judges and what have you, but don't take those being gospel. I think, as I mentioned earlier, that trust your taste is a really great thing. And to get together, I mean, my daughters are both like mid-20s, 23 and 26, and they and their group of friends have become very interested in wine.
That's great.
And both of my kids worked at Rist and Freda, actually. They were in a tasting room there in the restaurant, so they've had some quite good exposure to good quality wines and presenting it as well. Because I mean, Jean Engelbrecht knows how to train the guys properly. They've got a very good training system there. So, but they, with all their group of friends in Cape Town, all living together, a whole lot of them, and they've started having wine tastings amongst these kids that are 25, 26 years old. And they're enthusiastic about it, they're going out and they're buying different wines and they're trying, and they are very keen, but they've got to keep an open mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
And not say you're not going to drink Pinotage because of such and such,
Sure.
Open your minds and try. And I think, and then also for anybody interested in wine, if you're lucky enough to be in and around the Cape or any other wine growing region, to get out and go and taste at the farms and meet the winemakers.
For sure.
I organised a tasting for Hayley, my older daughter, and her group of friends with Duncan Savage about 2-3 weeks ago, and they went there and they said they had an absolute fantastic experience with him. They kind of, we shouldn't really use the word high, but it is almost like being high.
Yeah, of course, definitely.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Well, I was going to literally say the same thing, is that we're all super spoiled, like if you stay within the Western Cape, we are surrounded by all these majestic farms producing absolutely amazing wines, and sometimes it's easier said than done, but if you have the opportunity to just expose yourself to a different wine, go and visit this estate and take it all in, there's like a natural passion that's going to develop within inside you, and your appreciation is going to just come up like you can't believe. So I really encourage everybody out there to just try something new. Take Jeremy's advice over here and just trust your palate. Yeah.
We're not drinking nearly as much wine as you and Guy drank with a semi-on it. So maybe the white one slips down easier in the afternoon than red.
But Jeremy, so lastly, I wanted to ask you, the Nikela, after all this time, how do you think the wine's presenting itself to us this afternoon?
I think it's incredibly mellow. It's still quite youthful. For a 19-year-old wine, it's still pretty youthful.
I was just about to say, it's
still got time to go. And it's just the background to the Nikela, which I didn't really talk about, I haven't spoken about, but my folks helped me to get the business going. I mentioned I also did some crowdfunding like you're busy doing at the moment, to get some money in the beginning, and we sold the benches, and we had help from a whole lot of outsiders that we didn't know about, put some money and got wine in lieu of cash return. And but my folks certainly helped, and we came over and took over my dad's squash court, and my Mandy and I moved out here and kind of half took over the property, but they were very supportive. And that was in 92, we started, 93 we moved out here, 97 my folks both died in the same year. And from unrelated illnesses, but just the way it went. And I decided I wanted to do something special as a dedication to them.
Yeah.
And just after they died, I was asked by the Pinotage Association to be part of their work study group on the concept of Pinotage as a blending component in red blends, to try and come up with a unique blend, like Bordeaux have got their blends, Super Tuscans and the Rhone blends and all that kind of stuff. So I got involved with this project, and it was very interesting for me to have to be involved in it. And through that, I decided, right, I'd also like to do a Pinotage blend, which obviously thereafter became known as Cape Blends.
Yeah, Cape Blends.
Mm. So got me fired up on the idea of doing a Cape blend, and then I thought, well, it could dovetail quite nicely with wanting to do a special one as a tribute dedication to my folks. And that was the start of the Nikala.
Okay.
And Nikela means in African languages, in Xhosa, Zulu, Nguni group of languages, to give a gift or dedication tribute to your ancestors. So the first wine that I did was 1997. I still had, because we keep our wines in the barrel separately for quite a long time. In 1999, when I made up that blend, the wines were still in separate Cabernet, Pinotage, Merlot. Those were the only 3 grapes we had at that stage. And I made up a blend. And as the platter guide said, this wine in the 1997 Nikela, the first vintage of Nikela, but it was Jeremy's parents' last vintage. It was quite nice to play on the words and what have you. So it's become a very special wine to me. And for the first number of years, it was the Cabernet Pinotage Merlot. And I mentioned a bit earlier about with getting involved with Guy and trying Shiraz, and eventually we decided to get Shiraz into the blend, and this was the first one on the Shiraz.
Nice. So the Nikela is also your flagship wine at Grangers?
Well, yeah, it's not our most expensive wine. Our top wine is the straight Grangehurst we got there, which is a more of a serious Bordeaux style blend, Cabernet Petit Verdot Merlot, or Cabernet Merlot Petit Verdot, depending on the vintage, and that has about 3 years in barrels. Yeah. And so that's our flagship. Okay. But the Nikela, people often say to me, which is your favourite wine? And it's very difficult, So, and honestly, that's changed. Sometimes I prefer to drink a Pinotage and sometimes something else. But this is the most special one for me because of the sentimentality and all the rest of it.
Thank you for sharing it.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. And Jeremy, just quickly, what is the blend? Making up the Nikela.
This blend is I think the exact percentages I'll have to go and look up for you, but but we normally have somewhere between 35. The Cabernet and Pinotage components are normally much the same, between 30 and 35%. This one only had 12% Shiraz. Okay. And the reason for that was that the Shiraz was actually not a 2002 vintage. I blended that. I didn't have Shiraz in 2002, but I was keen with the 2002 to get Shiraz going. Okay, cool. So I had to keep it to under 15%. So the Shiraz component here was 12%.
Well, funny enough, it's only 12%. Yeah. It actually really sticks its head out. I mean, there's a bit of spice coming out on the palate. Yeah. And the wine is great length. And I mean, for 2002, that is an amazing wine. Yeah. And I'm very, very stoked that we got to taste it this afternoon. I'm very thankful that you're including a bottle of the Nikela in the mixed case of 6, which the folks out there can obviously get their hands on. All you need to do is just make a small donation towards my educational campaign. You can click on the QR code over here or on the link below in the description. But other than that, Jeremy Walker, thank you for having me this afternoon.
Great
pleasure. And now you've heard it straight from the horse's mouth.
Cheers.
But folks, before I love and leave you, I'd just like to remind you all that there's no standard when it comes to your enjoyment for wine. And remember, be kind
and drink good wine.
Cheers.
Cheers, guys.